Hey everybody, welcome back. We are still in Simple Machines. You are still building things on your Rube Goldberg. Hopefully it's coming through and you've already added some inclined planes to it. We're going to look at the next Simple Machine, and that is a lever. If you notice on this picture, we've seen this picture before. We have the thing that we're trying to lift on one side. We have the effort on the other side. So let's learn some of these other words that are there. There's three main parts that we're going to talk about. We've already mentioned the effort. That's the force applied to do work. But there's also the load, and load is often labeled R because it's the resistance. It's the thing that we're trying to overcome. It's the thing we're trying to lift. It's the thing we're trying to move. And sometimes that's combined with all the other natural resistance like friction and gravity and all those other resistances that are on it. But when we're using a machine, whatever we're trying to move or push or pull, that's called the load. And I mentioned this little piece before. This is a little pivot point. It's usually in pictures it looks like a triangle, but it's the part that the lever is laying on, the fulcrum, and it's labeled F on a lot of pictures. It's the pivot point of the lever. And when you see the pictures, you'll understand what I mean. So here's the pictures. There's actually three different spots that fulcrum can be in. So on the top one, the top left corner, if you notice the fulcrum is in the middle. There's a force on one side, there's a load on the other side, and we've seen that a lot of times. I've given you a lot of pictures of people trying to lift a rock or lift something, and they're pushing down on one side, and the load is lifting up on the other side, and the fulcrum is in the middle. Another way that you could have it is that you could have the fulcrum at the end, and I'm going to show you some pictures in real life of what these look like. Look at what the effort's doing though. Instead of pushing down, the effort is lifting up. And as the effort is lifting up, the load is getting lifted up too. I think I'll just tell you one of the examples of this could be a hammer taking out a nail. Where the hammer touches the wood, that would be the fulcrum. Where the nail is being lifted out is the load, and the effort is up on the handle. You're pulling up on the handle to make the nail go out. And a third way that fulcrum could be, it could be on the end. Your effort could be in the middle, and the load would actually be going down. So I know these three are a little bit weird looking, but let's take a look at them in real life and see if we can picture where the fulcrum is, that's the pivot point, where the load is, that's the resistance, and where the effort is, the person using force. I like to use, by the way, these are called first class, second class, third class levers. And I like to remember them by the word free. Now, it's not actually free, it's only F-R-E, so I guess it's free, but free isn't a word, so let's call it free. Well, what's it mean? What I'm looking at is what is in the middle of my lever. On a first class lever, my fulcrum is in the middle, so that's why it's an F. On my second class lever, the resistance is in the middle. And on my third class lever, the effort is in the middle. And so that's where I got the F-R-E, the free. And if I can remember free, then I can remember what's in the middle of my lever. F for fulcrum, R for resistance, E for effort. Here, those are the ones that are in the middle. There's the pictures of them again. And down on your notes, you have the word free, and you have a spot to write F-R-E, and then fulcrum, resistance, and effort. So here's some examples. Maybe you didn't picture these as well. A first-class lever that has the fulcrum in the middle, has the force on one side, has the effort on the other. Now the effort on this slide, they call it input force. That's the effort. When you're squeezing a pair of pliers, you're putting effort on one side. You have a fulcrum in the middle, and then whatever you're trying to do with the pliers is getting done by one end. The second class, a wheelbarrow. You have the fulcrum where the wheel is. The load is in the middle, and you lift up on the end of the handle, and you lift the load, and the fulcrum is where that change is occurring. And the third class level is your arm. Think about your arm where you have an elbow in the middle of your arm. How can you do curls, or how can you lift anything up? Go ahead and take your pencil even in your hand and just bend your arm and lift it up. That elbow is the fulcrum. So you have force going on in those two, and you have the load. So the whole reason that we use machines is to get a mechanical advantage. So how do we figure out mechanical advantage for a lever? Now, you know, with the ramp, we figured it out by the slope of the ramp divided by the height. For a lever, it's a little bit different. We're going to take the distance from the fulcrum to wherever the effort is. So we'd have to measure the distance from the fulcrum to the effort. And then we'd go back to the fulcrum and we'd measure the distance from the fulcrum to the load. So as you can see on the lever that's on this slide, the distance between the effort and the fulcrum is 30 meters, and the distance between the fulcrum and the resistance is 10 meters. So we divide the distance from the fulcrum to the effort by the distance from the fulcrum to the load. So we have to divide 30 by 10, and we get the answer of 3 MA. Remember, we're putting MA as our label. We get 3 MA, and that is the mechanical advantage of using this lever. Now there's one other one that we're going to look at, and that is pulleys. Pulleys really kind of a wheel, just like the wheels that were on a car, or kind of like a screw is a kind of inclined plane. But pulleys are so important that people give them their own categories. They are kind of like a wheel and an axle, but they are very, very important. It's a wheel. It's got two raised edges. You usually put a rope through it, and then how you string the rope allows you to be able to lift things that you definitely couldn't lift on your own. In fact, and we also call it a block and tackle. That's another word for it. So here's a monkey with one hand lifting his buddy, the elephant. One of the things we said about simple machines is that they can change the direction of your force. Now I realize this guy's lifting just a tiny little basket, but suppose he was lifting the same thing that the pulley over on the right is lifting, a giant steel, I don't know what you would call it, block. For him, lifting up on that block would be very, very difficult. It still would be a little bit difficult for him to be it still would be just as difficult for him to use a pulley and to be pulling downward. But in pulling downward, he can use his whole body weight, he can use a lot more and can increase his effort in order to lift that block. So it changes the direction of the force. A pulley can do that. Now remember, all these things have to do with doing work. We are using force times distance in order to do work. That's the definition of a work, and we're using machines to help us do that. Yep, we're even going to use math. Force and distance. Force times distance equals work. So let's take a look at this. If I have a force of 50, maybe it's 50 newtons that I'm using, and I'm going over 2, I get to be 100. That makes sense. All right, but look what happens if I increase my distance. On the second one, I doubled my distance, but now look at what happened to my force. My force decreased. How much force I needed decreased when I increased my distance. And look at the bottom one. When I really increased my distance, look at the tiny little force that I had to do. Instead of let's pretend that they're people. Instead of taking 50 people to do something, I only need 2. That would make sense. That's why pulleys are so important. So a pulley decreases the force that I need by increasing my distance. Now you can see the very first one that I put, the A down on the bottom, really does increase the distance that I'm going to be lifting, but it also changes the direction that I'm doing. So I don't need to as much be pulling up, I'm pulling down. But take a look at C and D and especially E. Look at all that rope. That rope is going to help lift the resistance. The rope is really long. The rope has to go through all those different pulleys, and there's multiple layers of rope holding on to that resistance. They're increasing the distance that block is being lifted. So how do we figure out the mechanical advantage? This is probably the easiest one. No math, no dividing. You just have to know how to count. To figure out what the mechanical advantage is for a pulley, you need to count the number of ropes that are supporting the load. Now it doesn't include the last little piece that you're hanging on, last little piece between the effort and the first pulley. So on the very first one, there is one rope holding on to the resistance, and then there's the little part that we're pulling on. So that has a mechanical advantage of 1. The second one has 2 ropes that are hanging on to the resistance. They have a mechanical advantage of 2. And the third one, it has 3 ropes hanging on to the resistance. 1, 2, 3. It's a mechanical advantage of 3. And the last one has 4 ropes. Every single rope except for the one that the resistance is the effort is pulling on is counted. And it is increasing my mechanical advantage to 4. So if we were talking people again, the first one could lift. You would only have 1 person lifting. The fourth one would be same 1 person could do the work that 4 people would have to have done. So take a look at this tug-of-war game. All these guys pulling on one side. As they work together, they're able to do a great amount of things. Well, it's the same thing with you and working with a simple machine. The simple machine increases your ability to do the work that needs to be done, the push or the pull that makes matter change. So by you working all by yourself, you can do the same amount of work as you could if you didn't have the machine and you had 3 of you trying to do, or 4 of you, or 10 of you, or 100 of you, depending on the machine. So simple machines are really helpful for us. And we are at the end of this chapter. Yes, the end of this chapter. What we are going to do as far as now to the end of the year, we're going to work more with our simple machines. So here's a picture of them. Our simple machines, remember we had an inclined plane, we had a wedge, we had a lever. We also talked a little bit about a wheel and axle and a screw and a pulley. All of these things are going to be part of your Rube Goldberg machine. We're going to come back and review some. We're going to just we'll still be getting together and doing different projects that are specifically for your Rube Goldberg machine. Sometime I may come on and ask you, hey, send me a picture of your pulley, or send me a picture of how you're using an inclined plane in your project. So there will be things that we will be getting together to do. We also have a worksheet to do, and then we have a test. So we've got to get through those things, and then the rest of the year we're going to just work on Rube Goldberg. And we'll do some of it together, and a lot of it you're going to do on your own. And ultimately, the last week of school, we're going to share videos of everybody's Rube Goldberg and all the things that went on. So I will keep putting up pictures as much as I can so that you can get better ideas. But again, one thing I have added to this assignment is I added the same video that I added at the beginning, which I taped for the beginning. So you'll hear me talk about things such as, well, you're watching this as before you do the video, so you won't understand it. But now you do. Now you understand all of it. If you want to watch that over just to remind yourself of the things that you have to do, go ahead and watch it. In fact, I would encourage you to watch it. If you're doing really great and you think you have everything that I'm going to grade on, that's great too. But tonight we're going to just do the worksheet. Tomorrow we'll get together and review the worksheet. We'll go over a little bit more stuff. Then we're going to take a test. And after that, we're going to do just simple things on the Rube Goldberg. So we're doing it, guys. We're getting to the end. Have a great day.